Hey guys, Hamsterwheel here, and today I want to talk about the Cataclysm expansion. You see, after playing it a fair bit on private servers and admittedly having a pretty good time on them, it got me wondering, is this expansion really that bad? I mean, Cataclysm gets a bad rap, but is that really deserved? Well, today I want to talk about exactly that. Before we start, I just want to say that this is coming from a person that did not experience retail Cataclysm. Matter of fact, I already quit retail WoW in the Burning Crusade, and it was only in 2014 that I finally checked out Cataclysm. I originally started on a private server called Molten WoW, which is now named Warmane. Back then, that Cataclysm private server had the most people playing on it, but it was an absolute mess of a server. There was even a period on their server where, because of some bug, 90% of the Cataclysm questing content was not available because you couldn't get any quests. Yes, a Cataclysm private server where 90% of the Cataclysm questing content was not available. Needless to say, that private server didn't give me the best impression of Cataclysm, though I'll be honest here and say that at max level I did actually had a lot of fun PvPing. I'm no expert of melee classes, but I always felt like they played very smooth and streamlined in Cataclysm, and I had a lot of fun PvPing with my then Orc Warrior named Get More Crit, and also my Mage. Eventually, I quit playing that server, and it was around 2018 I started playing on another Cataclysm private server. This time, however, it was a proper Blizz-like server with most of the content working. So this time around, I was able to get a good experience of what Cataclysm is actually like. So I set out to level a Troll Hunter and really see what it's like to level in the Cataclysm expansion. And I'll go ahead and tell you one of my biggest problems with Cataclysm right now. It's the leveling. It's too damn easy. Honestly, of all the mobs I killed, almost nothing posed a threat. I never felt like I had to be on my toes, and it really felt like mobs were just throwing themselves into a brainless meat grinder. The meat grinder that is my character. Enemies just die way too easy, they do no damage whatsoever, and with heirlooms it becomes even more mind-numbing. This makes the whole world feel like a joke. Yeah, there's fire here, destruction there, but who cares? Any mob I encounter is dead in a few seconds and I don't feel engaged. Most of the time, I was just kind of present with my mind, tapping buttons as I was watching a show on my second monitor. And it's a shame, because the questing content itself is actually quite fun. Now, I'm not a huge fan of what they did to the world of Azeroth, like making 1,000 needles completely flooded and destroying Ashara, but it kind of makes sense in some way. It makes sense that the world is changing, and I always found it weird that some bridge in vanilla would get some repairs, yet 5 years later in the Wrath Lich King expansion, it's still not repaired. It makes sense that both the Horde and Alliance would try to take land and advance their positions, so given that premise, I actually like the world of Cataclysm in that way. I still prefer the old vanilla world, so to say, but there's no denying that the questing content in Cataclysm is a lot more diverse. The quests are all in the same hub, so to say, they offer more gear upgrades, and the tasks you need to do are also more diverse. It's just a shame that they made leveling so damn easy. Now, I get it, there's no fun in spending an eternity trying to get one mob down in a version of the game where you first have to get through the quote-unquote vanilla content, then Burning Crusade, then Wrath Lich King, and finally the Cataclysm content. I understand that with you being a lot stronger, you get to go through the questing content a lot quicker, and thus it doesn't take an eternity to get to max level. But you know what? Making it easy just made it boring for me. And I wish someone at Blizzard had the balls to say something like, alright, we know that now you have to go through vanilla and 3 expansions to get to max level. So screw it, everyone gets triple experience rate, but players won't be very strong even in crappy gear, and mobs pose a much bigger threat. That way, the world would still feel dangerous, and I would actually be more engaged with the game, rather than falling asleep mowing down mobs without breaking a sweat. Speaking of which, the dungeons in Cataclysm have the same problem. Most of the time, I was just bored as none of us were forced to think, deal with certain mechanics, or carefully pull packs of mobs, and everyone just rushed through there like it was nothing. Because, well, it was indeed nothing. Even the max level dungeons are not exactly what I call challenging. Now, I have to say that the heroic dungeons in their pre-nerf state were actually quite fun, and they offered a good challenge. It's just a shame that most private servers these days run the post-nerf version, And once again, they are pretty lackluster, especially if you're on a private server where they already are at Firelands or Dragonsoul. It's interesting to note that the original difficulty of heroic dungeons was a big problem early on for players, and that's simply because they were so used to mowing through heroic dungeons in the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. I mean, seriously, go to any fully progressed Wrath of the Lich King private server like Warhammer Icecrown and just see how fast and effortless people clear those dungeons. And those players, who probably expected the same thing in Cataclysm, hit a brick wall in the new heroic dungeons. All of a sudden, you had to carefully pull packs of mobs. CCing was required, and you had to follow the tactics in heroic dungeons to a T. I don't know, it's almost like dungeons in early Cataclysm were actually heroic. Now with the raids, there were also plenty of problems. First of all, back in Wrath of the Lich King, there was a difference in the difficulty of 10-man and 25-man raids. And in Cataclysm, they basically decided that in the beginning, the difficulty was exactly the same. So a lot of 10-man raid groups just fell apart, and it did a lot of damage to the community. Later in the expansion, Blizzard did manage to fix it, but that was already quite a bit of time into the Cataclysm expansion, so the damage was already done. Me, however, on a private server, well, I had a lot of fun progressing with my friends through Firelands. I have to say that the encounters were quite fun, though I agree that Dragonsoul felt very lackluster. Since the beginning of the expansion, we knew that Deathwing was the main bad guy, and for the fight to end in such an anticlimax, well, it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and you can't blame them for it. Which is another thing, Deathwing to me is a pretty meh villain. I mean, look at Arthas. There's an entire backstory that you go through in Warcraft 3, and you see him slowly but surely changing and eventually becoming the Lich King. Deathwing, however, just shows up one day and decides to destroy the world. I remember the first time watching the trailer, and I was like, did I miss something? Who is this? Why is he angry? Why is he destroying Azeroth? I think he was just introduced quite poorly, and I completely missed any sort of backstory. Another main complaint, and I agree with this, is that the raids felt kind of rehashed. I mean, what do we get? Blackwing Lair 2.0. And after that, well, Molten Core 2.0. Except now it's outside, and Ragnaros has legs. Now, don't get me wrong, I liked Firelands. I did that a decent amount with my friends, and we had fun progressing through that raid. The boss fights were interesting, and they had some pretty cool mechanics. It's just a shame that after doing Molten Core I don't know how many times on vanilla retail and vanilla private servers, we were once again back to a fiery landscape with similar looking bosses and a rehashed main boss. So yeah, there's a lot to complain about in Cataclysm. The leveling was boring because it was just way too easy and the world didn't pose any threat to you. The dungeons were the same, half of the raids were kind of rehashed, the final raid was a total anticlimax, the raid difficulty being the same for 10 and 25 man mode, and it just goes on and on. But I don't want this video to be all doom and gloom, because if that was the case, I wouldn't have played on Cataclysm private server so much, because there's a good amount of stuff that I actually do like. I liked how many of the classes played, like my warrior on Molten WoW, my hunter on Apollo, and my toons on Apollo 3, including my retribution paladin and my balance druid. Oh, and yes, it was a good time to be a balance druid in Cataclysm, since they are pretty darn good there. And thank God, elemental shamans were a lot more competitive in terms of DPS. I don't know if you've ever played an elemental shaman in Wrath of the Lich King, but man do they fall flat on their ass in the later tiers, especially in Icecrown Citadel, where they are so far behind other classes like warriors and fire mages, and essentially they are just there for the totems and the bloodlust. But in Cataclysm, oh yeah, they're not exactly S tier DPS, but it's a lot better than in Wrath of the Lich King. And while some aspects of the world I didn't like, a lot I actually do kinda like. And I like the fact that the game once again takes place on Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms again, rather than just one segregated island like in Mists of Pandaria or in Wrath of the Lich King. Also, the much wider range of options when it comes to class and race combinations was something I thought was pretty cool. I mean, I still don't know how on earth a goblin of all races could be a shaman, but for the most part I thought it was pretty cool. I was happy to see that for the first time ever, I didn't have to play a blood elf if I wanted to play a paladin on the horde side, and instead I could choose to be a Giga Chad Tauren. And to be honest with you, the Cataclysm questing content from 80 to 85 is also very enjoyable to me. I like how in Mount Hyjal you slowly progress through the zones, advancing your position and trying to stop the enemy from destroying the entire zone. I like how there's a lot more cutscenes, and how you unlock new quest hubs. Though, Vashir is admittedly a zone I always skip. I just don't like the underwater combat, and to me it just doesn't really work in WoW. And I think most people can agree with this. So yeah, what is the conclusion? Well, personally, I like Cataclysm. I like a lot of the features the expansion provides, and I definitely have fun playing on a Cataclysm private server like Apollo 3. But if I had to be realistic, I would put this expansion way behind Vanilla, the Burning Crusade, and Wrath of the Lich King. Because while there are a good amount of things that I do like, there's also a bunch of things that I don't like. And after scouring the internet for a bit, there's also a lot of valid complaints people had in regards to this expansion. So yeah, all things considered, I personally think Cataclysm gets a bit too much criticism for what it is, and for me it's still a fun version of the game to play through. But it's definitely not an underrated hidden gem that can match an expansion like the Burning Crusade. And that's gonna do it for now. As always, I want to thank you for watching. I'm Hamsterwheel and have a good one.